Hello and welcome to another episode of the Average Joe Football Show. I'm your host, Joe Fair. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. I'm sitting here again in our little studio, aka Joe's living room, sitting on couches here on a rainy, fantastically rainy Saturday morning. Recording this in the morning when we usually do in the evening, so it's a little early, so I might be a little tired as well. I mean, it's not early in the morning. Okay, so it's 11 o'clock.
It's 11 o'clock.
It's 11 o'clock, so it's borderline lunchtime that we're recording this. So it's really not that early, but it's a Saturday, so you know things are a little bit different as far as mornings go. But yeah, it's finally raining. We want to have a little weather talk here early in the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't got any rain in forever, and you know I haven't been able to mow my grass unfortunately in like 2 weeks because the grass is just dead. Something that I never thought I'd worry about.
And I don't.
Yeah, as a homeowner now, that's the thing that you actually have to worry about is mowing your grass, and haven't had to worry about that for a while. But it is also brown and dead, so it's like, what's really better, not mowing your grass or having the ugliest grass in the world? But yeah, thankful for the rain. Joe, how's it going? How are you?
I'm pretty good. It's been a pretty interesting week. I had my first, problem with my car in my marriage, or in my married life, I should say.
Really?
Yeah.
You're having marriage problems and car problems in the same week?
Just first time I've had car problems.
No, since wow.
As an independent man.
Wow. And how do you go approach like doing that, like fixing that problem?
We just took it to the shop and then got it fixed.
Oh wow. Look at that.
Actually pretty easy being an adult, actually.
There's always people to do those things
nice
for
that
you.
you
You don't
do
think
that.
about that.
But yeah, that's
It kind of puts it in perspective, though, if you have something like that. You're newly married, and you're like, wow, things are they're on me now.
yeah.
Like,
100%.
It's like, I'm the adult now, I have to figure things out. It's like, what was wrong with your car?
The alternator was busted. I don't know, busted, seized, shot. I don't know. It wasn't working. Okay, my car didn't work.
How did you figure out that it was the alternator? Is that because they told you?
My father-in-law.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
He said that because
Very good.
he's smart.
That's good. I can't imagine just knowing things about cars when people are like, oh yeah, my car's doing this or whatever, and the person's just like, oh, it's probably your bearings or something.
Yeah, like, okay.
Oh, okay.
Good that you know that.
I'm glad that you know that. How do I get to that point? You know?
Yeah.
It's like, whatever. Yeah, just a couple of boys making a podcast. Not quite grown men yet.
No.
Still kind of figuring out how that goes.
Still boys.
But yeah, speaking of my wife,
Perfect. Good transition. Very good.
Today is actually the day we're recording this. Is July 11th, which is my beautiful wife's birthday. So I figured I'd give her a quick shout out on her birthday. Happy birthday, Amy. I know by the time you listen to this podcast, it's not your birthday anymore, but thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for supporting me, and I hope you have or had a tremendous birthday, and I appreciate you. So a little shout out for you today. Oh, yeah, well,
very good.
You know, I got to do it. She always gives me feedback on the podcasts.
Very constructive criticism.
Very constructive criticism. Sometimes it is. She's probably the most critical listener that I have. Everybody else, I feel like, is kind of beating around the bush and being like, "Oh yeah, it's great, I love it." And she'll say, "Hey, if something's wrong, she'll let me know." Which is good.
That is good.
It's good. It's key to a strong marriage, I think, is being critical of each other.
Yes.
And fixing the alternator on your car. But yeah. Why don't we just, stop beating around the bush and just jump straight into the news for the week. First up in the news, we have Patrick Mahomes, Super Bowl MVP, former MVP, potentially the best quarterback in the entire league, signing his brand new contract this week. There had been reports for months now that Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs were in contract talks for a while now, and most people assumed that it would be the richest contract in NFL history, that he would be getting paid the most out of any player in the NFL. Obviously, every time a quarterback is up for a contract, we can basically expect them to become the highest paid player in NFL history because the incredible value of the quarterback position. And then when you add into the fact that Patrick Mahomes is potentially the greatest quarterback we've ever seen already just 2 years into his career, a potential Hall of Fame career. It looks like he's on that trajectory right now. He already has an MVP, has a Super Bowl ring, has a Super Bowl MVP, and now he signs this 10-year, $503 million contract extension.
Holy.
Yeah, it is the very first $500 million contract in American sports history, the richest contract in American sports history. Obviously, soccer players are out there making just outrageous money, so we won't get into that. I feel like almost like once or twice a week, I'll see a video on my Instagram feed of Cristiano Ronaldo driving Bugattis in his driveway.
Dude, that guy has got funny money.
Yeah, he's got silly money. He's just very rich, and he's just I don't know if it's the same video, but I just constantly see videos of him pulling up in 2 different Bugattis. I think he has 2 Bugattis, and it's him and his son, and he says something in Portuguese. I think he talks Portuguese.
Yeah, I believe. I think so.
He says something in Portuguese, and then he drives away. And it's like, yep.
Is it a TikTok? Does he have TikTok? Is it a TikTok video?
It might be a TikTok. I don't know. I don't have TikTok, but I see it on Instagram. And yeah, it's just good for him. He's still doing good. But Patrick Mahomes also going to be doing pretty well with his brand new contract. So it's 10 years. He has 2 years left on his deal still. So technically, he has a 12-year contract with the Kansas City Chiefs to stay in Kansas City for 12 more years. And you can tell Patrick Mahomes loves Kansas City. He loves the Chiefs organization. He loves being a part of the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's not a surprise to me that he wanted to sign up long term with the Kansas City Chiefs. But this contract is pretty crazy. It's not very often in the NFL that you see 10-year contracts that are double-digit years. I know a few years back during the early 2000s, or probably mid-2000s, we saw a couple of 10-year contracts. I know Donovan McNabb at one point signed, I believe, a 10-year contract with the Philadelphia Eagles. Brett Favre had his lifetime contract with the Packers that basically guaranteed that he would never play for another team, and then he ended up playing for 2 more teams before he retired. And there's players like that sign contracts, but for the most part, contracts are usually maxed out around 6 years. You don't often see more than 6, maybe 7-year contracts, especially in professional football. You'll see it in baseball a lot. Baseball, they have outrageous contracts where it's like 12 years, 14 years, just stupid contracts. I can't imagine just planning something for that long in the future, like 12 years. I guess it's easier to plan, making millions of dollars in 12 years than it is something else. But yeah, Patrick Mahomes signing this massive deal. And to put this in perspective, so it's a $503 million contract, and it was reported that he has $477 million in guaranteed mechanisms. I don't know what that means exactly, but usually they just talk about guarantees on contracts. So this is like how much money is guaranteed to you. You're going to get it no matter what. For some reason, they use the term guaranteed mechanisms this time. But $477 million is basically guaranteed the second he signed that contract. That's absurd. That's insane. He's getting around $45 million per year, which is substantially more than the next highest paid quarterback is making in the NFL. I believe Russell Wilson signed the biggest contract before this one. He's making $10 million a year more than Russell Wilson is making, which is just insane. To put this even more in perspective, I found this thing, and I didn't fact check it, so it could be wrong. I don't know, but it's it sounds right. So Patrick Mahomes is making $450 million over the next 10 years. I guess they kind of rounded the guarantees down, but so that's $45 million per year, $3,750,000 every month, $937,500 every week, $31,250 every day. So he's making $31,000 a day. That's insane. He's making $521 an hour. So if you want to compare that to what you're making an hour right now, $521 and $8.60 every minute. So he's making what some people make in an hour. He's making that per minute. That kind of puts that in perspective. Holy smokes, Patrick Mahomes is making a lot of money, and I want to say he deserves it. I mean, how much? I don't know. How much do the athletes really deserve getting paid this much money to play a child sport? I won't get into that, but you're worth as much as people are willing to pay you. And Patrick Mahomes is the best football player I have ever seen, and I'm confident in saying that 2 years into his career. I've never seen a player throw the ball the way he does. I've never seen a quarterback that I'm more confident in than Patrick Mahomes. I think he's going to have a fantastic career there in Kansas City. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and he's right in his prime, and he's just started his career. Him and Andy Reid, I think, have a bright future, and we could see many, many Super Bowls and potential new contract extensions after this contract is up, because he's only 24 now, so a 10-year contract or 12 years, so he'll be 36 when this contract is up. 36.
How old is
Tom Brady?
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady's 43. So
Wow.
Patrick Mahomes could still play for another 7 years after this contract is up.
So how can he? Side note, like, can he opt out of his contract at any point, or is that 12 years? That's like he plays that 12 years, or else he doesn't play NFL.
He could. So no, like he could ask for a trade. Like if he all of a sudden doesn't want to play in Kansas City anymore, he could say, "Okay, I'm done. I don't want to. I don't want to." Like, and they can't force him to play. Like if he wants, let's say he's like 5 years into contract, he's like, "I'm sick of football. I just want to retire." He's not going to get all the money. I'm sure there's aspects in that contract where it's like, if you retire early, you're not going to get all that guaranteed money. Like we saw Andrew.
You don't need $450 million.
What's that?
You don't need $450 million.
Like, what's the difference in your lifestyle really if you have $100 million or $500 million? Like, is there really a difference?
Serious? No. I think once you're in millions, it comes to very quickly.
Oh yeah.
It comes to a point where like you don't need any more money.
Yeah, it's like whatever is like put on top of that is just a cherry on top. Like
I know.
It's like you're never even gonna use that money unless you lose it somehow. Like that's like
stonks. You're gonna put it all on the
put it in the stonks. But yeah, it's like 1 million. Sure, I could see like you might want more money, but there's like a certain point. I'm not sure exactly where it is. There's a certain point when you get into the millions where it's like, how much does your life really change? If you keep acquiring money.
That's what I'm saying. And there's people that are gonna be making $450 million.
Yeah, it's like they don't need that. Why not give a little to us? We can build our podcast a little bit. Patrick Mahomes, come on.
Please.
Is that too much to ask for? But to wrap things up here with Mahomes' contract, I think I'm excited to see him stay in Kansas City. I think I'm really excited for his future. I mean, I think he's going to be a Michael Jordan type figure by the time he retires. I hope he is. I hope injuries don't derail his career or something, or he ends up not being as good as a lot of people project. But I'm really excited for the future of Patrick Mahomes. I think he's already the face of the NFL, and there's great times ahead for Kansas City fans and for the Kansas City Chiefs team. And next up in the news, we have another trade request. There's been a ton of trade requests this offseason. We're seeing more and more as players feel more empowered, and I think it's something that's come from the NBA, where players have more power than I think any league in the sports world, where they'll just ask for a trade. If they're not happy where they are, they'll ask for a trade. They'll kind of steer things towards where they want to go instead of what the team wants. And I think we're seeing that more and more in the different sports leagues, where players are taking control of their own career. They're not accepting the fact that, hey, I get drafted by this team and I just have to play for this team. Like, I didn't choose to play for this team. And we're seeing players demand trades and try to take more and more control over the career. And this week, Raheem Mostert, the running back for the San Francisco 49ers, the Super Bowl runner-ups, actually requested a trade. It seems like he and the 49ers have sort of been discussing a contract, or Raheem Mostert and his team want a contract extension, want more money. To put this in perspective with Patrick Mahomes' contract, Raheem Mostert, he's a guy who's bounced around the league. I believe he played on 6 teams and got cut by 6 teams before he played for the Niners last year and kind of broke out. But but he recently restructured his contract to make around $3 million this upcoming season. So Patrick Mahomes will be making, not this year, but when his contract starts, he'll be making $45 million compared to Raheem Mostert making $3 million. And Raheem Mostert was one of the most efficient backs on that committee there in San Francisco. And last year he was not making a whole lot of money. Obviously he was an undrafted guy, a guy who bounced around a lot, wasn't a big name free agent signing or anything. And there's a guy, Devontae Freeman, who they brought in last year, or 2 years ago, I believe, to be a running back there in San Francisco, and he's making more money than Raheem Mostert, and the production level has not been there for Devontae Freeman, who's making $4.5 million. And apparently, Raheem Mostert is looking for something along those lines, so he's not looking for a big contract. He just wants a little bit of a bigger contract extension or a contract, bonus. To get him closer to the level of Devontae Freeman. And apparently the 49ers are not down to give him that, and he's asked for a trade. As far as the running back position goes, it's so undervalued, and I don't know if I see him getting traded before the season starts. The Niners already traded one of their backs from their committee there in San Francisco to the Dolphins during the draft this year for a 5th-round pick. Matt Breida, who was really kind of the number one back at times there last year, they traded him away. So now Raheem Mostert wants a trade, and then you're left with Tevin Coleman and a couple of other guys that maybe aren't big profile guys, but that's kind of the offense that Kyle Shanahan runs there in San Francisco is sort of a running back by committee type of deal there. He's not reliant on one running back, so I wouldn't be totally shocked if the 49ers find a way to trade him. I don't know exactly where the suitors would come from. I think most teams are fairly confident where they are at the running back position, and you don't want to give up big assets for a running back when running backs seem to be fairly easy to come by. I mean, Raheem Mostert, like we said, was an undrafted guy and a guy that bounced around a lot, and then he became a star, especially during last year's playoffs. So it's not hard to come by great running backs as long as you have a good coach, good offensive line, and stuff like that. Next up, in the news, we have the Washington football franchise. We talked about last week they're changing their name. We went over a couple different names, had some discussions about what we thought the name should be changed as. And this week, it came out that the name is expected to be changed, obviously. It has not yet been announced what the team name is. I'm hoping that it does not get announced before this podcast gets uploaded. But it was announced that it seems like they're moving totally away from the whole Native American theme with their new name. It sounds like they're going to stick with the same colors, the burgundy and yellow, which is fantastic. To me, those are two of the best looking colors on uniforms in the NFL. But they seem to be moving totally away from the Native American theme for their new logo and name. A lot of people think that Warriors seems to be the number one pick right now for them. And also the Red Tails seems to be up there as well. I don't know the Warriors what they would go for as a logo if they're going to go completely away from the Native American theme, because it seemed like they were gonna do the whole spear on the helmet type deal if they were gonna go with Warriors, but that seems like sort of a Native American thing. So definitely stay tuned as far as that goes. I'm not sure where exactly they're gonna go or when exactly they're gonna announce the new name. Obviously, a lot of things going on in the NFL. And other aspects, but this is still a big news story as far as the Washington franchise goes and where they go with their new team name. Next up in the news, this week we had wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, DeSean Jackson, coming out, and this is an insane story. So this week on his Instagram story, he shared quotes from Hitler that were from Hitler. They were basically saying things like saying anti-Semitic things. I won't get into it, but saying things against Jewish people. And he's on a team where the general manager is a Jewish man, Howie Roseman. The general manager there in Philadelphia is Jewish. The owner of the team, Jeffrey Lurie, is a Jewish man. And so basically saying anti-Semitic things, and it was obviously met with some backlash. A lot of people were surprised that it was not met with enough backlash. He had a lot of people come out and support his comments really this week. We had DeSean Jackson, who's been very vocal over the whole George Floyd killing and everything going on. DeSean Jackson, former player in the NBA, former basketball player, coming out. He was actually good friends with George Floyd before he was murdered. I guess good friends with him after he's murdered as well. But we had him coming out and sort of supporting what DeSean Jackson said, and I think that was kind of a weak move by DeSean Jackson. And then we had Malcolm Jenkins come out this week and basically say that people making a big deal about somebody making anti-Semitic comments is a distraction from the Black Lives Matter movement, which seems like such an irresponsible statement to me. I mean, it's just, to me, I understand Malcolm Jenkins has a big voice when it comes to racial issues in the NFL. He's always been a huge supporter, obviously, of the Black Lives Matter movement, and he's been very vocal, very outspoken as far as racial issues go, and I support that. But to me, you also have to put it in perspective. There are other issues than just the Black Lives Matter movement. It's obviously an extremely important issue. However, there are other people, other races, other religions, other people groups that are also being persecuted against. It's not just African Americans. We've talked, a couple shows ago or last week about the Native Americans who have received a ton of inequality throughout generations and generations. And there are multiple different groups of people that have problems with inequality, have racism issues. Anti-Semitism is one of the biggest problems out there as far as racial inequality goes. And I think it was an irresponsible statement by Malcolm Jenkins, and he should be held accountable for saying things like that. You can be passionate about Black Lives Matter movement. You can be passionate about African Americans having more freedom and more rights, and still be against anti-Semitism. And I think DeSean Jackson came out and apologized for the statement, and I hope that he learned from this. And Julian Edelman released a video where he invited DeSean Jackson to go to the Holocaust Museum with him, sort of put things in perspective. But to me, I just wanted to address this to sort of just point out, sort of a double standard. When Drew Brees came out and said statements that I genuinely don't think Drew Brees meant as a racist statement. He received a ton of backlash, a ton of hate, and Malcolm Jenkins, was really passionate and crying on Instagram about it. And then when DeSean Jackson released a statement that was genuinely pointed towards pointing out a certain group of people and belittling a certain group of people and calling out a certain group of people, Malcolm Jenkins totally goes the opposite way and just supports what DeSean Jackson says and doesn't condemn what he says. To me, that was sort of a weak move by DeSean Jackson and Malcolm Jenkins this week. But I just I would encourage everybody, just love everybody and stop hating. Just everybody love everybody. Life would be a lot easier if everybody just loved people and didn't do racist things on social media or send racist text messages. Or just be racist, stop being bad and start being good. And it would solve a lot of problems in the world. But yeah, that's just me. Next up in the news, we have more COVID-19 updates. I love it. My favorite part of the show. Obviously, we got to talk about it a little bit as COVID-19 is kind of putting the season in jeopardy. It seems more and more discouraging as far as there not being a football season. It was something that I hadn't even really considered, the fact that we might not have an NFL season. A few months ago, I honestly didn't even think about it. I never crossed my mind that it might not happen. And it's starting to seem less and less likely that we're going to have an NFL season. The NFL seems determined to go on with the season, and I hope it goes off without a hitch. I think that there will be problems. But this week, the NFL, I guess, attempted to solve one of those problems in banning jersey swaps at the end of games. So this is a thing that's been going around a lot. The younger generations loves to swap jerseys after games. They'll have a friend on the other team. They'll sign the jersey. They'll take a photo. One guy's holding the other guy's jersey. The other guy's holding his jersey. It's a big thing, and this is ridiculous to me. I mean, they're banning jersey swaps because of social distancing. Meanwhile, these guys just played 60 minutes of a football game in which you are tackling, sweating, spitting, bleeding all over each other, and now you want to talk about social distancing after the game is over. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is comedy. This is something that I would expect to see on The Onion or something like that, where it just seems absurd. How did they not think that this would be received with some backlash? I understand social distancing, all that, great. But you're not social distancing when you're playing professional football. You're not social distancing when you have a bunch of grown, sweaty men grappling each other and bringing each other to the ground. That's not social distancing. That's literally the exact opposite. And then you want to act like you're trying to, have social distancing during NFL games at the end of the game by not doing jersey swaps, which is really less invasive than the actual game. I mean, you don't even really have to make contact with each other when you're swapping jerseys. You can just hand the guy or throw the guy the jersey and stand beside each other and take a picture. It's insane. Joe, do you agree with it? Or what are your thoughts?
That's absolutely ridiculous.
It seems absurd.
That makes me it honestly makes me think that this is if they're banning that, then it's I guess that's so much. It's less invasive than the whole grappling situation.
Yeah.
It makes me think that the NFL season is in a little bit more trouble because maybe this is just the last thing. This is one of the first things they're gonna do, but then eventually I think it's gonna be we can't play football.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I very much agree.
Fear of mine.
Yeah, I was definitely going to. I was gonna get to that point as well. I think that's a good point. I think it's if they're banning jersey swaps, I don't understand how they can possibly play football.
Exactly right.
You cannot social distance while playing football. You cannot social distance while playing basketball. You cannot social distance while doing any of these things. Golf is essentially the only sport that you can play while social distancing. It makes no sense to me. It seems like such a minuscule, dumb thing to ban. When there are much larger, more important situations that you need to take care of and handle. But yeah, it does not look good for the potential NFL season. The NFL also announced this week that, well, I guess the NFL didn't announce it, but it got leaked out that the NFL was proposing to the NFL Players Association that players essentially take a 30 to 35% pay cut this season because of potential losses that the NFL might or will face this season due to the pandemic. The NFL is projected to lose, I believe, around $3 to $4 billion because of this pandemic, because fans not being in the stands, and all the things that have been affected by COVID-19. So the NFL kind of said that, hey, the players we'll take 30 to 35% of your money and we'll put it away for a little while, and then until we get back up on our feet, and then we'll give it back to you. And players obviously were not very happy about this. And I think my immediate instinct is to be like, oh yeah, these crybaby millionaires don't want their money taken away. But, if you think about it from the perspective of the company that you work at, and let's say, the company had a hard time during the COVID thing, but you're still working, you still have to go to work during the pandemic, and the company's like, hey, turns out we can't actually pay you right now the full amount, so we're going to take, almost half of your paycheck, and we're just going to move it a few months down the road until we're in a good spot. I mean, that wouldn't fly, right? That wouldn't be a good thing for me to have. I wouldn't be happy about that. So why is it different when NFL players, I understand they're making millions of dollars and they're worth millions of dollars, but, it's not my problem if the company, is not making money. I just work here,
I just work
it's here. It's not my problem if you're not making money. You still got to pay me. You made that commitment to me to pay me. So I understand why the NFL players would be angry. I wouldn't want my money taken away. That's not how things go. But a bunch of COVID stuff still going on. Obviously, we'll keep you updated on the show as far as COVID-19 goes, and hopefully hopefully in a few months we have actual football to talk about. So yeah, we remain hopeful, but a little cautious at this point. All right, for the next part of the show, we're jumping into a new series that we're starting here on the podcast, and that's the top 5 players at every position in football. We're going to go through position by position each week, starting with the running backs this week. Next week, we're going to do the defensive backs. We're just going to rank my top 5 players at every position. And this is something that I've been doing for years before I even had a podcast, before I had some platform to do it on. Every year before the season starts, I go back and I rank my top 5 players at every position. And now I have sort of somewhere to put it, somewhere to be criticized for it. So excited for that. And without further ado, why don't we just jump into the top 5? Coming in at number 5, I have running back for the New York Giants, Saquon Barkley, as my number 5 running back in the NFL. And this is this list and these top 5 lists are sort of a projection. They're based on two things. They're based on how the player played last season and also where I project them to be during the 2020 NFL season. So it's kind of a combination of both. It's not really one or the other. And for a few of these guys, for me, it is projection. It's guys that had down years last year, who I think will develop into superstars and have a fantastic 2020 NFL season. And obviously, I think Saquon Barkley is going to have a fantastic 2020 NFL season because I have him at number 5 in my top 5 running backs list. And I think this is a guy who, if his career trajectory goes where we think it's going to go, I think he'll be much higher than top 5. I think he could be a potential number 1 running back in the NFL in a few years' time. A couple years back, obviously he was the rookie of the year. During his rookie year, he had really the best year of his career. He had sort of a down year last year with injuries. His rookie season, he had 261 carries for 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns, 5.1 yards per carry. And then he added in 91 receptions for 720 yards, 4 touchdowns. And the guy had 0 fumbles during his entire rookie season. That was something that really stuck out to me. Not a single time during his rookie season did the guy put the ball on the dirt. I mean, coming out of college, Saquon Barkley was kind of praised as the next great running back, the next Adrian Peterson type of running back. We've had a few guys come out of college where they had hype and they were basically, bona fide superstars. They were guaranteed superstars. I remember a couple of them. Adrian Peterson obviously was a big name coming out of college. And Saquon Barkley, and I think Leonard Fournette was another guy who people thought would be just a star from the get-go when he got to the NFL. And so that was Saquon Barkley. He has all the talent to be, I think, the best running back in the NFL. He's a freakish athlete. I mean, the guy's got quadriceps, the size of something very big. I mean, much bigger than my quadriceps, that's for sure. And a little fun fact about Saquon Barkley. His full name, I found this out on Pro Football Reference, is actually Saquon Rasul Cuevis Barkley, or Cuevis Barkley?
Cavis?
So, Cuevis? It's a Q.
It's a Q, but sometimes queso. Queso?
That's true.
Cheese?
I hope it's not Cavis, because then it sounds sort of ignorant of me to pronounce it like that.
Yes. I'm just reading it here right now.
Saquon Rasul Cuevis Barkley. What a cool name. Holy smokes. It's a cool guy overall, I'd say. And last year, the guy had a down year. He was injured for 3 games. He only played 13 games last year after playing all 16 during his rookie season. He had 217 carries for 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, 4.6 yards per carry, so a little bit down from his rookie season. And he had 52 catches for 440 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he had his first fumble. But still, to me, 1 fumble, and this is not fumbles lost. This is fumbles overall. Anytime he put the ball on the dirt, he has 1 fumble in 2 full NFL seasons, which is crazy to me. A lot of running backs, especially a guy like Adrian Peterson and guys like LaShawn McCoy, they've been guys who are really good running backs, but they've struggled with fumbles. And Saquon Barkley, in 2 NFL seasons, has fumbled the ball just 1 time. And to me, the reason why he's number 5 on my list is I think he's a dual threat guy. He's a potential guy I could see going and doing what Christian McCaffrey did last year, getting 1,000 yards receiving and 1,000 yards rushing during his rookie season. Like we talked about, he already had 700 yards receiving, so he's getting pretty close to that mark. But he's a guy that I think he's the best offensive weapon on a team full of young offensive weapons. They have Evan Ingram there, Sterling Shepard, guys like that. Guys, they have a ton of potential. Like I talked about on my Instagram, on my power rankings. Make sure you tune into my Instagram for that. I talked about all the young offensive weapons that they have on the team, and Saquon Barkley is the number one player on the team. He is the leader of that offense. That offense goes through him, and I think he's a generational talent. We haven't seen many guys like him come out of college where we just knew he would be a fantastic player. And I think with a young, growing quarterback like Daniel Jones, I think one thing that could really help him in his career is having a guy like Saquon Barkley, a safety blanket, so that all the pressure is not on Daniel Jones, that he can dump it off to Saquon Barkley in the flat, or dump it off to him in certain situations when he panics, or if he's not feeling comfortable, just audible to a run and give it to the best player on your team. So that to me is why Saquon Barkley comes in at number 5 on my top 5 running backs list. Coming in at number 4 on my top 5 running backs list is running back for the New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara. Fun fact about Alvin Kamara, if you go to his Pro Football Reference page, the guy has 81 receptions in all 3 years as a pro. Exactly 81 receptions in all 3 years as a pro. So sort of a fun fact about Alvin Kamara. Definitely a weird thing to have exactly the same number of receptions every single year. But he's a guy, speaking of receptions, he's very different than the other running backs on this team. He has not once in his 3-year career rushed for 1,000 yards. He's never been over the 1,000-yard mark in his NFL career as a running back. So you might be asking yourself, how the heck is he in the top 5 running backs, Joe? How does he make it on the average Joe top 5 running back list? And to me, he's just different. He's a different player. He's very much a Christian McCaffrey type of player. Talking a lot about Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, we'll get to him later during this countdown. But I think if Alvin Kamara was in the type of situation that Christian McCaffrey is in Carolina, where he is the focal point, he is the number one guy on that offense, I think his production would be very much the same that we would see with Christian McCaffrey, where I think Alvin Kamara is a guy in his career who has the potential also to reach that 1,000 mark that so few people have reached in their career. I mean, he's a guy who, another one who had sort of a down year last year. Injuries plagued his season a little bit. He played with injuries. He missed 2 games with injuries. Last year he had 171 rushes, which is already substantially less attempts than a guy like Saquon Barkley had. He had just about 800 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns, 4.7 yards per attempt, 401 yards after contact. He is a bruiser. He's a guy who is not only agile, not only fast, not only quick, but he'll run you over in certain situations. And then receiving the ball, he also had 81 receptions, like we talked about, and 530 yards receiving and a touchdown. He sort of struggled with fumbles a little bit more than a guy like Saquon Barkley had. He had 4 fumbles last year during his down year, and he's had 2 other fumbles throughout his career. So that's something that we could definitely see him correct this upcoming season. But I think his best year to me came during his rookie season in 2017 when he played all 16 games, and it really puts into perspective what we could see from his career going forward. I think he'll only continue to get better. In 2017, the guy had 120 attempts for 728 yards rushing, 8 touchdowns, 6.1 yards per attempt, which is fantastic. And he also had 81 receptions, 826 yards receiving, and 5 touchdowns. So he had 826 yards receiving in his rookie season, and he had 730 yards rushing. I mean, this is a guy who puts up stats, and he's such a crucial part of that offense. And I think as Drew Brees gets older, as his arm strength starts to go down, we could see him checking down to running backs a lot more. I think Alvin Kamara, he's not only the number one running back on that team, but he's one of the best receivers on that team. Obviously, Michael Thomas is kind of the number one receiver there, but he's such a versatile weapon, and you can use him in so many different ways. So to me, there's no doubt he's a top 5 running back in the NFL, despite his numbers maybe not being up there with some of these other guys as far as rushing yards go. I think what he brings as a receiver and as an all-around player gets him at number 4 on my list. Coming in at number 3 on the top 5 running backs list is Titans running back Derrick Henry, who was the NFL's leading rusher last year. Fun fact about Derrick Henry, one of his nicknames apparently on Pro Football Reference is Tractorcito. Tractorcito is apparently Derrick Henry's nickname. What's roughly, well, not roughly, it does translate to Little Tractor, which is apparently, I looked into the history of it. I had no idea this was one of his nicknames, by the way. I had no clue. I've heard King Henry, people call him that. I've never heard of Tractorcito, and I love it. I think I'm going to refer to him as Tractorcito from now on. Apparently, during his time at Alabama, during one of his games, the ESPN Spanish radio was doing a call on one of his big touchdown runs, and during the touchdown run, called him Tractorcito. And people have never been able to find that audio, apparently. Since I looked for the audio, I could not find it. But his name is Tractorcito. Love it. And it's quite fitting because the guy is absolutely massive. Derrick Henry is very different than a lot of running backs on this list. I mean, he's 6'3", 250 pounds. I mean, just a monster of a man. And he's not only, that big, he's athletic, he's fast. I believe he ran a 4.5 40-yard dash for a guy that big and that strong. And he's very much a different type of running back than we see on this list. But I had to include him on this list with how dominant he was down the stretch last year. He's purely a runner. He's not a receiver. He's not a guy who's going to get you that 1,000. He's not a guy that's really going to get you 500 yards receiving. But he's a guy that you can just continually hand him the ball, and he will get you yards. He will grind you out yards. He had a breakout year last year in 2019. He had a career best in yards, touchdowns, yards per attempt, and attempts. He had 303 carries for 1,540 yards, 16 touchdowns, 5.1 yards per attempt, 968 yards after contact, which is absolutely absurd. So every time this guy yards after contact, to put this in perspective, if you get hit, the yards that you get after you get hit the first time is yards after contact. So this guy got hit, and still after he got hit, he got 968 yards out of his 1,500 yards. That's absurd. I mean, the guy is an absolute monster when it comes to running the football, and he's the very definition of a workhorse back. He only had 18 receptions last year for just over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he added a couple more touchdowns, but overall, I mean, the guy is a running back. He is a runner. He's going to get you yards running the ball. You don't need to worry about him catching the ball. They've brought in a young running back to sort of be that pass catching back. They're basically just worried about Derrick Henry running the ball, and he did quite a good job of that last year. Down the stretch, during the last 5 regular season games, he had 896 yards rushing, which averages out to just under 180 yards per game rushing, which is out of this world. I mean, just absolutely ridiculous. He really came into his own at the final stretch there when Ryan Tannehill jumped into the lineup. He came into his own and became the best running back in football last year for the Tennessee Titans. He was the leading rusher, obviously, last year. Just beat out Nick Chubb, who was really leading the league for most of the season until Derrick Henry broke out. And then it got to the playoffs, and the Titans continued to shock people during the playoffs, and Derrick Henry was the main reason for that. In his game against New England, he had 34 attempts for 182 yards rushing, and then against the upset in Baltimore, he had 30 attempts for 195 yards, and then in Kansas City, he had a smaller game. He had 19 attempts, less attempts for 69 yards. So he averaged almost 150 yards per game during the playoffs, which is, again, a crazy number. I mean, there's no way he can keep up these numbers, but if he can get anything close, I think he could be in for another dominant season. He ended the season on a tremendous, torrid hot streak. I mean, he was the hottest running back in the NFL last year. And I think we could see that sort of transition into this next season. And the reason that he only comes in at number 3, despite being such a dominant runner last year, is because he just doesn't do it in the pass game. Obviously, he's not a pass-catching guy. He's not a dual-threat guy. As the NFL starts to move more and more towards dual-threat running backs, we don't see running backs like Derrick Henry very often anymore. We don't see just pure runners, guys like Adrian Peterson. We don't see like guys like that anymore in the NFL. But with how dominant Derrick Henry was last year, there's no doubt in my mind that he deserves to be in the top 5 and at number 3 on my top 5 running backs list. Coming in at number 2 is the Dallas Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott. Fun fact about Ezekiel Elliott, his dog, Ace, actually has his own Instagram account. So, yeah, he's one of the people that makes Instagram accounts for his pets. I won't get too deep into that, but that's something, people making Instagram accounts for their dogs. I feel like famous people especially think that they're all, they have all this attention. They're like, oh yeah, why not have an Instagram account for my dog? It's like, I already get all this.
And his dog probably has
so many followers.
Way more followers than you.
No, so many more followers than me.
Like,
that's
embarrassing.
For what? I mean, what is the content that this dog is pushing out? There's no way this dog is making a top 5 running back list, in the 2020 NFL season. What is he doing that deserves, all those followers? I'm putting in work. This dog is just owned by Ezekiel Elliott. That's not fair.
You know the dog's name?
Ace.
Oh, you said that.
Yeah, I said Ace. So it's not even a cool name.
That's fine.
That's just a decent
all right name.
And he has to have his own Instagram account. Whatever. Anyways, Ezekiel Elliott, despite your taste in pets on social media, I think you're a fantastic running back. You come in at number 2 on my top 5 running backs list. He's a guy who the explosive offense there in Dallas, an offense that I'm extremely excited for, and I've hyped up a lot for the upcoming season, if this season happens, obviously. He's a guy that this offense really centers around. Another guy who is a guy who can do it in the passing game, but he is mostly a runner. To me, he's a guy who can do essentially what Derrick Henry does, and that is be a powerful runner, an in-between the tackles guy, a downhill runner. He can be that guy, but he can also give you 500 yards receiving every year. He's a guy who continues to just be consistently elite, be consistently one of the best running backs in football. Last year, he had 300 attempts for 1,350 yards, 12 touchdowns, 4.5 yards per carry, 680 yards after contact. So another guy who gets a lot of yards after contact. He had 54 receptions for 420 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then in 2018, he had 300 carries for 1,400 yards, 6 touchdowns, 4.7 yards per carry, another 595 yards after contact, 77 receptions, 567 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So he's a guy that'll give you, he'll give you at least 1,200 yards receiving, and then add on top of that at least 500 yards rushing. He's a guy who you can center the offense around, and I think he's the best player on that Dallas Cowboys offense. And that's saying a lot. I really like Dak Prescott. I think he's an underrated quarterback. Amari Cooper is obviously a fantastic wide receiver, and they have a lot of talent on that offense there in Dallas. And you can say, he's just been helped out by a fantastic offensive line there in Dallas. But that offensive line is not as good as it used to be. I mean, they've lost a lot of pieces. They're not as talented as they were. I'd say that there's still an upper echelon, a top tier lineman group. But to me, they're not as good as they once were. And Ezekiel Elliott continues to be consistently great every year. And people almost forget about Ezekiel Elliott because the Dallas Cowboys are not always top Super Bowl contenders. They kind of forget how good Ezekiel Elliott is and how important he is to that Dallas Cowboys offense. So to me, Ezekiel Elliott, he's one of my favorite players to watch. He's a player that I'm excited about in 2020. He's my second favorite running back in the NFL. He's a guy who runs with not only power, but he can run with finesse, and he can be a workhorse guy, and he can be the focal point of that offense like he's been since he led the league in rushing during his rookie season. Coming in at number 1, my number 1 running back headed into the 2020 NFL season. And if you know even a littlest bit about running backs in the NFL, I think you know who the number 1 guy is going to be. It's Christian McCaffrey, the running back for the Carolina Panthers. This is a guy who absolutely had a dominant year last year with the Carolina Panthers. He was absolutely the focal point of that offense. He was that offense at times last year. Obviously, Cam Newton was injured for most of the season last year, and so he had guys like Kyle Allen throwing to him, guys like Will Grier who that in there at quarterback, and he still had a dominant season, a potential MVP type of season. He was a 1,000 guy. He had 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving, which is just crazy to me. He had 287 attempts last year for 1,387 yards, 15 touchdowns on the ground, and 4.8 yards per attempt, which is right up there. If you're at 4.0 as far as yards per attempt go, that's pretty good. So to be at 4.8, I think is really good. He had 513 yards after contact, and he had 116 receptions at the running back position, which is crazy. There are so many receivers, upper echelon receivers, that don't get to 100 receptions. So to be a running back and to have almost 300 carries, and then you add to that yet 116 receptions for 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, this is a guy, he is the best offensive weapon in football. He is a guy who, coming into the draft, we knew he was going to be a fantastic receiver, an athletic weapon that they could use in multiple different ways. But a lot of people thought that he was not big enough, was not strong enough to run between the tackles and be that workhorse back. So what did he do? He goes out and puts on a ton of weight. He has massive arms now. I mean, he's just a jacked guy. He's a guy that's become that workhorse guy, not only as a workhorse in the sense of a running back, a guy who's going to run the ball, but he's a workhorse in the passing game. I mean, he's a guy who I think this year he could see the same success that he had last year. He could see 1,000 again. And to me, he's a potential dark horse MVP candidate. I don't project the Carolina Panthers to be all that dominant this year as far as playoff contention goes, but I think he is going to be the most valuable player on this team, and he could be the most valuable player in the league. I mean, you brought in Teddy Bridgewater to be your quarterback this year, and Teddy Bridgewater, the biggest knock on him is that he's a very cautious, careful quarterback. And what do cautious and careful quarterbacks like to do? They like to dump it off to the running backs. They like to get the ball out quick. So that could mean a lot more receptions, a lot more touches for Christian McCaffrey. And I expect to see him have a similar season like he did last year and potentially have MVP votes this upcoming NFL season. I mean, the guy, he's a freak athlete. And a fun fact about him, I gave everybody else a fun fact. Fun fact about Christian McCaffrey, he comes from probably the most athletic football family I've ever heard of, or just athletic family in general. His dad, Ed McCaffrey, was a football player for the Denver Broncos for many years. He was a wide receiver. His mom played soccer in college at Stanford. His grandpa, I believe, was an Olympic medalist as far as sprinting goes. His brother, one of his brothers, played in the NFL for a few seasons as a wide receiver. His other brother is the quarterback at Michigan University, and another brother is the quarterback at Nebraska. So like these guys are just incredibly athletic. It's like, what? How come all of their family members got to be athletic, and like I didn't have a single person in my family get even close to that? How is that even fair? You know, but you can tell where he gets his freak athleticism from. So for me, you know, he's borderline the number one receiver and rusher on that team, and I expect Christian McCaffrey to be very dominant again this year. Before we close out the show, I'm just gonna go over some guys that just missed the cut for my top 5. Give guys a couple guys some credit. And some people might be upset that they're not on this list, but guys like Dalvin Cook just missed the cut. To me, he hasn't shown enough to be in the top 5 yet. He had a really great year last year, but I haven't seen enough. I think he's been injured a lot, and we don't even know if he's going to play this season. He might hold out with a contract situation, so Dalvin Cook didn't quite make my top 5. Nick Chubb, even though he was the second leading rusher in the league last year, didn't quite make my top 5 either. He's a guy who I think he's going to have some carries and some targets taken away by Kareem Hunt there and by all the other offensive weapons they have there in Cleveland. And a guy like Joe Mixon, who's a younger guy who I think is one of the better running backs in the NFL, but just not quite top 5 to me. He's a guy who could get there, but he's mostly just a runner, sort of like a Derrick Henry type. He's not an elite receiver, and he's not quite to the dominance of Derrick Henry. So those are guys that just missed the cut here at the top 5. But yeah, that kind of wraps up our show today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you tune in next week for the top 5 cornerbacks/defensive backs in the NFL. We're going to go over that, and then we're going to continue to do this top 5 series for a couple of weeks. Make sure that you follow the show on Instagram and Twitter at _AverageJoeShow. And if you're listening to the show on any place where you can rate, subscribe, review, please do that. Leave us a good rating. Subscribe so you can get updated every Tuesday when we upload new podcasts. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and I make sure you tune in every Tuesday for new episodes, and we will catch you guys on the next one.